You think you're clever, Maid? Name the poison. Reginald Voss's voice sliced through the Miami hotel ballroom, his sneer a blade aimed at Zora Ellis's throat. The billionaire CEO of Voss Pharmaceuticals loomed over her, his tailored suit gleaming under the chandelier's glow, his eyes cold with contempt. Zora, a 42-year-old black maid, stood frozen mid-step, her tray of champagne flutes trembling in her grip. Moments ago, she'd swapped a spiked drink meant for Elena Torres, a journalist poised to expose Voss's falsified drug trials. Now caught in the act, she faced his wrath before a crowd of Miami's elite, senators, investors, and socialites, their whispers buzzing like hornets. Reginald's finger jabbed the air. "You swapped the glass. Don't deny it." His words snapped like a whip, cutting off Zora's breath. Her pulse hammered, but her jaw locked tight, teeth grinding against the urge to flinch. She'd overheard his aide, Malcolm, muttering about silencing Elena, seen the faint powder dissolve in the drink. Her instincts, honed from years of watching power plays unfold in hotel corridors, kicked in. She'd acted fast, replacing the glass with a clean one from her tray. But Reginald's eyes had tracked her every move. "Speak," he barked, stepping closer, his cologne sharp and suffocating. "Or is your kind only good for cleaning?" The crowd's murmurs spiked, a few gasps piercing the air. Zora's chest burned, not with tears but with a fire that coiled tight in her gut. Her fingers clenched the tray, knuckles whitening. She was a single mother, scraping by for her kids, Jamal and Kiana, in a city that chewed up dreams like hers. This man with his billions thought he could crush her with a word. "I know what I saw," Zora said, her voice low, steady, like a blade drawn slow. "Sedative, benzodiazepine class, from your trials." The room stilled, glasses pausing mid-sip. Reginald's smirk faltered, his blue eyes narrowing. How could a maid know that? Zora's night spent studying biochemistry on a cracked laptop, decoding her late husband's medical charts, gave her the edge. She'd recognized the faint chemical sheen in the drink, the same drug linked to Voss's botched trials. "Impossible," Reginald snapped, cutting her off. "You're nobody, a servant." His hand slashed the air, dismissing her. "You think you can play hero? I'll have you fired by morning." The threat landed like a fist, and Zora's heart lurched, not for herself, but for her kids, who needed her paycheck. The crowd's eyes bored into her, some pitying, others amused, their silence complicit in her humiliation. A senator coughed, looking away. A socialite smirked behind her wineglass. Zora's throat tightened, but she refused to crumble. Her years of enduring slights, guests ignoring her, managers barking orders, had forged steel in her spine. She locked eyes with Reginald, her gaze unyielding. "You assume I don't see," she said, each word deliberate. "But I see everything." The accusation hung, sharp and heavy, a challenge to his power. Reginald's jaw twitched, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He'd expected her to beg, not to strike back. Malcolm, his aide, stepped forward, voice oily. "She's lying, sir. Probably stole the glass for attention." The lie stung, but Zora didn't flinch. Her hands steadied on the tray, her resolve hardening. She'd saved Elena, but at what cost? Reginald leaned in, his breath hot. "You'll regret this, Maid." The word maid dripped with disdain, a reminder of her place in his world. But Zora's pulse roared with defiance. She'd exposed a crack in his armor, and the crowd's whispers grew louder, sensing blood. As Reginald turned away, signaling security, Zora stood rooted, her tray a shield. The ballroom's opulence faded. Only her racing heart and the weight of his threat remained. She'd ignited a war she couldn't afford to lose. Somewhere in the crowd, Elena Torres clutched her untouched drink, eyes wide with realization. A single napkin, monogrammed CV, slipped from Malcolm's pocket to the floor, unnoticed by all but Zora's sharp gaze. It was a clue, a spark, promising a reckoning. Zora Ellis's words, "I see everything," hung in the Miami ballroom like a guillotine blade, slicing through Reginald Voss's smug dismissal. The billionaire's jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with fury. But Zora didn't waver. Her tray of champagne flutes, still gripped tight, felt like armor against the crowd's stares. Senators, socialites, and investors gawking at the maid who dared challenge a titan. Her heart pounded, not from fear but from a fire kindled by years of being unseen, dismissed, erased. She wouldn't break. Not here, not now, not for him. Reginald stepped closer, his voice a low hiss. "You're done, Maid. Pack your things." The threat stabbed deep. Zora's kids, Jamal and Kiana, flashed in her mind, their faces tied to every paycheck she earned. Her teeth ground hard, jaw aching with the effort to hold back a retort. But she wasn't here to beg. She straightened, her spine a steel rod, and met his gaze head-on. "Fire me," she said, voice steady as granite, "but you can't unsee what I know." Each word landed like a dart, sharp and precise, daring him to look away. The crowd's whispers surged, a wave of shock rippling through silk dresses and tailored suits. A senator shifted uncomfortably, a socialite's glass tilted, spilling wine. Reginald's aide Malcolm tried to cut in. "She's delusional, sir." But Zora's glare silenced him. Her hands, calloused from years of scrubbing floors, tightened on the tray, steady as ever. She'd faced worse. Hotel managers barking, guests sneering. And each time, she'd walked away with her head high. This was no different, even if the stakes were her family's survival. "You'll pay for this," Reginald spat, his finger jabbing the air, inches from her face. Zora didn't flinch. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but a quiet defiance that burned hotter than his rage. "I already have," she said, voice low, lethal. "Every day, for years." The words carried the weight of a lifetime. Raising kids alone, studying biochemistry at midnight, swallowing slights to keep food on the table. She turned, tray steady, and walked toward the service door, her steps deliberate, each one a refusal to bow. The ballroom held its breath as Zora's silhouette vanished through the door, her final words echoing like a prophecy. Reginald stood rooted, his fists clenched, her calm slicing deeper than any shout could. The crowd's eyes darted between him and the empty doorway, their murmurs now a low roar. Elena Torres, the journalist, clutched her untouched drink, her knuckles white, knowing Zora had saved her. On the floor, the monogrammed CV napkin lay crumpled, a silent promise of secrets yet to unravel, glinting under the chandelier's harsh light. Reginald Voss's penthouse in downtown Miami pulsed with silence, the kind that screamed louder than the gala's chaos hours earlier. Zora Ellis's words, "I already have, every day, for years," clawed at his skull, her steady gaze a ghost that wouldn't fade. He paced the marble floor, his polished shoes clicking, his fists balled tight enough to bruise. The billionaire CEO of Voss Pharmaceuticals wasn't used to being rattled, but that maid, Zora, had pierced his armor with her calm, cutting defiance. Her claim about the sedative lingered, a splinter he couldn't pull out. He slumped into a leather chair, yanking his phone from his suit pocket. The gala footage, streamed live for shareholders, was already online. He tapped play, jaw tight, watching the moment Zora swapped the drink. Her hands moved with surgical precision, no hesitation, no nerves. She'd named the substance, benzodiazepine, a drug from his company's trials, without blinking. Reginald's pulse quickened. How? A maid? His finger hovered over the screen, pausing on her face, eyes fierce, unyielding. "Impossible," he muttered, but his voice cracked, betraying doubt. His phone buzzed. A lab report from his security chief landed in his inbox, marked urgent. Reginald's eyes scanned the text. Substance in glass confirmed as flurazepam, Voss trial batch 7A. Non-lethal dose, but sedative. His breath caught, a cold fist twisting in his gut. Zora was right. Malcolm, his aide, had sworn it was just a prank, but the lab didn't lie. Reginald's hand shook, slamming the phone down. He'd mocked her, threatened her job, humiliated her before Miami's elite, and she'd been dead on. A maid had seen what his million-dollar team missed. His eyes flicked to a crumpled napkin on his desk, slipped from Malcolm's pocket during the gala chaos. Monogrammed CV, it wasn't his. His initials were RV. His sister, Clara Voss, CFO of Voss Pharmaceuticals, flashed in his mind. Why her initials? His thoughts spiraled, the napkin a jagged puzzle piece that didn't fit. Was it tied to the drink? To something bigger? Reginald's chest tightened, regret seeping in, not just for Zora, but for trusting Malcolm's glib excuses. He dismissed her as nobody, but her words echoed, "I see everything." What else had she seen? He stood pacing again, his shadow sharp against the city's neon glow outside. Zora's face burned in his memory, her refusal to bow, her voice like a blade. He'd underestimated her, and now doubt gnawed at him. Had he misjudged others too? Malcolm's smirk at the gala, Clara's absence during the incident, pieces of a machine he thought he controlled. His fist hit the desk, a low growl escaping. He'd find Zora, not to fire her, but to know how she knew. The napkin, CV, sat like a ticking bomb, hinting at secrets buried in his empire, waiting to detonate. "You underestimated me, boss, but I'm not your pawn." Zora Ellis's words from the gala burned in Reginald Voss's skull, each syllable a hammer strike to his pride. In his Miami penthouse, the billionaire CEO of Voss Pharmaceuticals gripped the CV napkin, its crumpled edges biting into his palm. The lab report, confirming Zora's claim about the sedative, sat like a guilty verdict on his desk. He'd humiliated her, a black maid, in front of Miami's elite, assuming her ignorance. Now her precision haunted him, her face, unyielding, fierce, etched in his mind. He wasn't just wrong. He'd been outplayed. His chest heaved, a storm of regret and curiosity churning. He had to find her, not to crush her, but to understand how a maid saw through his empire's cracks. Reginald stormed out, his polished shoes pounding the marble floor. "Malcolm," he barked, dialing his aide. No answer. His jaw clenched, teeth grinding. Malcolm's lie about the drink, just a prank, felt flimsier now, and that CV napkin gnawed at him. Was it Clara's, his sister? He shoved the thought aside, his Bentley roaring to life as he sped toward the hotel. The city's neon lights blurred past, but all he saw was Zora's gaze, cutting through his arrogance like a blade. He'd mocked her as nobody, but nobody didn't call out a benzodiazepine by name. At the hotel, the concierge, a wiry man with a fake smile, blocked his path. The maid? Zora Ellis? Night shift, maybe. His tone dripped with disdain, as if Zora were a stain on the carpet. Reginald's fist tightened. "Find her! Now!" The concierge hesitated, then scurried to a phone, muttering about lowly staff. Reginald's pulse thumped, his patience fraying. Every delay felt like Zora slipping further away. Her words, "I see everything." A taunt he couldn't shake. He cut in, "Hurry up, or I'll have your job." The concierge flinched, dialing faster. Minutes later, a supervisor, her badge reading Marla, appeared, arms crossed. "Zora's in the East Wing, cleaning conference rooms." "Why do you care?" Her eyes narrowed, protective, sensing trouble. Reginald's throat tightened. He wasn't used to explaining himself. "I need to speak to her," he snapped, but his voice cracked, betraying unease. Marla's lip curled. "She's not your servant here." The jab hit hard, echoing his own cruelty at the gala. He pushed past her, ignoring her protest, his strides long and urgent. The hotel's polished halls felt like a maze, each turn amplifying his guilt. He'd threatened Zora's livelihood, her kid's future, all because he couldn't fathom her brilliance. In a dimly lit conference room, he found her. Zora knelt by a table, scrubbing a stain, her movements precise, relentless. Her apron was frayed, her hair pulled tight in a bun, but her posture screamed defiance. She didn't look up. "Back to gloat, boss." Her voice was ice, sharp enough to cut. Reginald froze, his planned apology dissolving. "I was wrong," he blurted, the words raw, clumsy. Zora's hand paused, her knuckles whitening on the rag. "Wrong?" she echoed, standing, her eyes locking onto his. "You called me nothing, threatened my kid's future? That's not wrong. That's cruel." Reginald's chest burned, her words a mirror to his shame. "I didn't know," he said, stepping closer, but Zora raised a hand, stopping him cold. "You didn't want to know," she shot back, her voice a whip. You saw a black maid and decided I was less. Her accusation landed like a punch, and he flinched, his usual control unraveling. He fumbled for words, but she cut him off. Save it. I don't need your pity. Her eyes blazed, but beneath the fire, exhaustion flickered. Years of fighting battles like this one. He pulled the lab report from his jacket, holding it out like a peace offering. You were right. Fluorazepam. I checked. Zora's gaze flicked to the paper, then back to him, unyielding. And, she said, arms crossed, daring him to mean it. Reginald's throat bobbed. I want to make this right. His voice was low, almost pleading, a tone he hadn't used in decades. Zora's jaw tightened, her fingers twitching as if weighing his sincerity against a lifetime of broken promises. Right, she said, her laugh bitter. You don't fix a lifetime of being invisible with one apology. Reginald's hands shook, the napkin's CV burning in his pocket. He didn't mention it, too raw, too uncertain, but its weight pressed against him, a clue to something darker. Zora turned back to her cleaning, dismissing him without a word, her silence louder than any shout. He stood rooted, his empire's weight meaningless against her resolve. As he left, her rag hit the table with a sharp slap, each stroke a vow to keep fighting. Outside, the hotel's neon sign flickered, casting jagged shadows, whispering of secrets. Clara's initials, a buried truth, waiting to ignite the next battle. Mom, you're a badass, you know that? Jamal's voice cut through the cramped Miami apartment, his grin flashing as he sprawled on the sagging couch. Algebra book open. Zora Ellis, still in her frayed hotel apron, didn't look up from the stove, where spaghetti bubbled, its steam curling around her tense jaw. Reginald Voss's half-baked apology, I want to make this right, still stung, his words hollow against the memory of his gala sneer. She stirred the pot, her wrists snapping with force, each motion a silent rebuke to his arrogance. Her kids, Jamal and Kiana, were her anchor, not his pity. She wasn't broken by his cruelty. She was forged by it. Zora's hands moved fast, chopping onions, her knife a blur. Her eyes burned, not from the onions, but from the fire still smoldering since the gala. She'd called out a billionaire's poison, saved a journalist, and walked away with her head high. But the cost gnawed at her, Reginald's threat to fire her, the elite crowd's stares, the weight of being just a maid. Her teeth clenched, the blade hitting the cutting board with a sharp thwack. She was 42, a single mother, scraping by for her kids in a city that didn't care. Yet she wasn't done fighting. Kiana, her 10-year-old daughter, wheezed softly from the corner, clutching an inhaler. Mom, are you okay? She asked, voice small but piercing. Zora's heart twisted, her hands pausing. I'm fine, baby, she said, forcing a smile, though her knuckles whitened on the knife handle. Kiana's asthma meds drained her paycheck, but Zora never let her see the strain. She crossed the room, adjusting Kiana's blanket, her touch gentle but fierce. You focus on breathing, all right? Kiana nodded, eyes wide, trusting. Zora's chest ached. She'd do anything to keep that trust alive. On the coffee table, a cracked laptop glowed, open to a biochemistry course. Zora's late-night ritual, studying after shifts to understand her husband's fatal illness, had sharpened her mind like a blade. It was why she'd spotted the sedative at the gala, why she'd named it without flinching. She sat, fingers hovering over the keys, scrolling through chemical formulas. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with purpose. She wasn't just surviving, she was learning, building, fighting for a future where her kids wouldn't be invisible. A knock at the door jolted her. Who's that? Jamal muttered, eyes narrowing. Zora stood, wiping her hands on her apron, her spine stiffening. She opened the door to find Tasha, a nurse from the community clinic where Zora volunteered. You didn't show tonight, Tasha said, concern creasing her brow. Heard about the gala. You really take on Voss? Zora's lips twitched, a half-smile breaking through. Didn't plan to, she said, voice low. But he pushed me. Tasha laughed, sharp and knowing. Girl, you're trouble. Zora invited her in, pouring coffee from a chip pot. Tasha sat, glancing at the laptop. Still studying that science stuff? She asked. Zora nodded, her fingers tapping the table, restless. Helps me see things, like that drink. She didn't mention the CV napkin, but its shadow loomed in her mind, a puzzle piece tied to something bigger. Tasha leaned forward. Clinic needs you tomorrow. Folks asking for your medical form breakdown. Zora's jaw tightened, pride flickering. She taught neighbors to read hospital bills, to fight for their rights. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Jamal piped up. She's a superhero, Tasha. Took down a billionaire. Zora shot him a look, but her chest warmed. No capes here, she said, ruffling his hair. Kiana giggled, her wheeze easing. Zora's resolve hardened. She wasn't just a maid, not to them, not to herself. Reginald's world of power and sneers couldn't touch this. Her real world, where she built hope from scraps. As Tasha left, Zora returned to her laptop, eyes locked on a formula, her mind racing. The CV napkin, glimpsed at the gala, whispered of secrets. Clara Voss, perhaps, waiting to unravel. Her fingers curled, ready for the fight, as the stove's steam rose like a battle cry. You think one sorry fixes a lifetime of being stepped on? Zora Ellis's voice cut like a switchblade, her eyes locked on Reginald Voss in the cramped Miami Community Clinic. The billionaire stood in the doorway, his tailored suit absurd against the peeling paint and flickering fluorescent light. Hours earlier, Zora had been in her apartment, stirring spaghetti and teaching her kids resilience, her mind still burning with the gala's humiliation. Now Reginald had tracked her here, his presence an invasion of her sanctuary, her arms crossed, fingers digging into her biceps, holding back the urge to shove him out. She'd faced his kind before, powerful men who thought apologies erased their sins, but she wasn't bending. Reginald's jaw twitched, his usual swagger faltering. I'm here to fix it, he said, voice low, almost raw. He stepped forward, but Zora's glare stopped him cold. Fix it, she snapped, her words a whip. You threatened my kid's future, called me nothing. Her teeth ground, the memory of his gala sneer. You're nobody, Maid, igniting a fire in her chest. The clinic's waiting room, filled with patients clutching forms, fell silent, their eyes darting between the maid and the mogul. Zora's pulse hammered, but her stance was iron, forged by years of scrubbing floors and swallowing slights. I was wrong, Reginald said, his hands raised, palms open, like a man pleading for mercy. You saved that journalist. You saw what my team didn't. His voice cracked, betraying a crack in his armor. Zora's eyes narrowed, searching for a lie, but his gaze held steady. Guilt, not manipulation. She didn't trust it. Words don't pay my bills, she shot back, stepping closer, her apron still tied from her shift. You don't get to waltz in here and play savior. Her finger jabbed the air, inches from his chest, daring him to flinch. Reginald didn't. He pulled the lab report from his jacket, its edges creased from his grip. Flurazepam, you nailed it. I checked. His admission hung heavy, a confession to her brilliance. Zora's breath caught, her mind flashing to her late-night studies, decoding her husband's medical charts. She'd named the sedative at the gala, not from luck, but from years of grinding through biochemistry on a cracked laptop. And, she said, voice sharp, refusing to soften, what's your angle, Voss? No angle, he said, his voice dropping, urgent. I need your help. Something's off. Malcolm lied about the drink. He hesitated, then added, and this. He held out the CV napkin, its monogram stark under the clinic's harsh light. Zora's eyes flicked to it, her pulse spiking. Clara Voss, his sister, flashed in her mind. The CFO's absence at the gala, the napkin's cryptic initials. A puzzle piece, dangerous and unfinished. You want my help? Zora's laugh was bitter, cutting. After you humiliated me? She turned, grabbing a stack of medical forms from a desk, her hands moving with furious precision. I help people here, not billionaires who think they own me. Reginald's face tightened, but he didn't back down. I'll fund this clinic, he said, voice firm. New equipment, staff, whatever you need. But we find who's behind this, together. His offer was a lifeline, but Zora's jaw clenched, weighing it against a lifetime of broken promises. She paused, her fingers tightening on the forms. My terms, she said, voice steel. You back me, no strings. And you listen when I speak. Reginald nodded, his eyes locked on hers, a silent vow. Zora's heart raced. She wasn't forgiving him, but she saw a chance to unravel the gala's poison, to protect others like Elena. She turned to a shelf, grabbing a medical journal to distract herself, but a folded note slipped out, marked CV in sharp ink. Her breath hitched. It read, trial data buried. Ask about batch 7A. Her eyes met Reginald's, both sensing a storm brewing. Deal, she said, her voice ablade, handing him the note. But cross me again, and you're done. Reginald took it, his fingers brushing hers, a spark of uneasy alliance igniting. As Zora turned back to the patients, her hands steady but her mind racing, the note's words burned, a clue to a deeper conspiracy, tying Clara to the sedative, promising a fight bigger than either of them. The clinic's door swung shut behind Reginald, its creak a warning of the battle ahead. The CV will note a fuse ready to light. You're digging into things that'll bury you, Maid. Clara Voss's voice lashed out, venom dripping as she cornered Zora Ellis in a sleek hallway of Voss Pharmaceuticals' Miami headquarters. The CFO, Reginald's estranged sister, stood tall in a tailored blazer, her icy glare cutting through Zora like a scalpel. Moments ago, Zora had sealed an uneasy pact with Reginald, their hands brushing over the CV note, trial data buried. Ask about batch 7A, a clue tying Clara to the gala's poison drink. Now Clara's sudden appearance, her heels clicking like gunfire, ignited a new battle. Zora's pulse surged, her fist clenching, the weight of her apron swapped for a borrowed blazer that didn't hide her outsider status. Clara's lip curled, her eyes raking Zora's thrifted outfit. You think you belong here? She snapped, stepping closer, her perfume sharp and suffocating. A nobody playing detective? Zora's jaw locked, teeth grinding, the sting of nobody echoing Reginald's gala sneer. She'd come to the headquarters with Reginald to probe the note's meaning, her biochemistry knowledge their only edge. But Clara's ambush, her voice dripping with classist disdain, hit like a slap. Zora's chest burned. She was a single mother, not a corporate pawn, yet here she was, facing another Voss ready to crush her. I'm not playing, Zora shot back, her voice steel, each word a defiant jab. I know about batch 7A. Clara's eyes flickered, a crack in her polished mask. But she recovered fast, cutting Zora off. You know nothing, she hissed, her finger jabbing the air. Keep pushing, and you'll lose more than your job. The threat sank deep, Zora's kids, Jamal and Kiana, flashing in her mind, their futures tied to her paycheck. Her knuckles whitened, nails biting into her palms, but she stood tall, her spine unyielding, forged by years of enduring slights in hotel corridors. Clara leaned in, her voice a low growl. Reginald's soft, but I'm not. Stay out of my way. She brushed past Zora, her shoulder slamming into hers, a deliberate power play. Zora stumbled, her breath catching, but her eyes stayed locked on Clara's retreating figure. The hallway's sterile air felt electric, charged with Clara's hostility. Zora's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a fire kindled by the CV or note's promise of buried secrets. Clara's reaction confirmed it. Batch 7A was no mistake. It was a cover-up, and she was guarding it like a dragon. Reginald appeared, his face tight, having caught the tail end of the clash. What did she say? He demanded, his voice sharp, but Zora cut him off. She's hiding something, she said, her words ablade. That note? It's hers. Reginald's jaw clenched, his loyalty to his sister warring with the truth. You sure? He pressed, but Zora's glare silenced him. She just threatened me, she said, her voice low, lethal. You tell me. His eyes darted to the hallway where Clara vanished, doubt carving lines into his face. Zora's pulse raced. She'd faced Reginald's arrogance, but Clara's ruthlessness was a new beast, one that saw her as a threat to an empire. A security guard lingered nearby, his radio crackling, his gaze flicking toward Zora with suspicion. You don't belong here, he muttered, echoing Clara's venom. Zora's teeth ground, her resolve hardening. She wasn't here to belong, she was here to expose. The CV note burned in her memory, its cryptic message a fuse ready to ignite. Clara's hostility wasn't just personal. It was a wall protecting a deeper crime, one Zora's biochemistry knowledge could crack. As Reginald hesitated, his hand twitching toward his phone, Zora's eyes narrowed, her fingers curling with purpose. The fight was no longer just hers. It was for every patient harmed by Batch 7A. Their faces unknown, but their pain all too real. Clara's heels echoed in the distance, a ticking clock, signaling a war Zora was ready to wage. Act 3, Investigation and Escalation Point. 8, Investigation Process, Ranarm, Hona 500 words. You're either with me or against me, boss. Choose now. Zora Ellis's voice slashed through the tense air of Voss Pharmaceuticals' archive room, her eyes boring into Reginald Voss like a drill. Clara's threat, "You'll lose more than your job," still burned in Zora's chest, her fingers trembling with fury as she clutched the CV note from the clinic. Its words, "Trial data buried. Ask about Batch 7A." A grenade waiting to explode. Moments ago, Clara's icy hostility in the headquarters hallway had confirmed her role in a cover-up, and now Zora, a 42-year-old black maid, was diving headfirst into a corporate conspiracy, with Reginald as her reluctant ally. Her jaw clenched, teeth grinding as she faced him, demanding loyalty in a world that had never given her any. Reginald's face tightened, his hand raking through his hair, doubt carving lines into his brow. "Clara's my sister," he snapped, cutting her off, his voice sharp but unsteady. "You're sure it's her?" Zora's glare didn't waver, her fists balling at her sides. "She threatened me. Her initials. Her drug. You tell me." Her words were knives, each one slicing through his hesitation. Reginald's throat bobbed, his loyalty to Clara warring with the lab report and napkin that screamed her guilt. "Fine," he said, voice low. "We dig. But if you're wrong—" Zora cut him off, her finger jabbing the air. "I'm not. Let's move." They stood in the archive room, a maze of file cabinets and humming servers, the air thick with dust and secrets. Zora's pulse raced, her biochemistry knowledge, self-taught from midnight study sessions, her only weapon. She yanked open a drawer, her hands moving with furious precision, scanning folders labeled Batch 7A. Reginald hesitated, then joined her, his fingers flipping through files, his breath uneven. "What are we looking for?" he asked, his voice tight. "Proof," Zora said, her voice ablade. "Clara buried something deadly. I'll know it when I see it." Her eyes scanned chemical reports, her mind decoding formulas like a code breaker, each page a step closer to the truth. A file caught her eye, Batch 7A trial data, redacted. Her heart pounded, fingers trembling as she pulled it out. "This," she said, slamming it on a table. The pages were blacked out, but her trained eye spotted inconsistencies. Chemical markers altered, side effects erased. "Fluorazepam overdoses," she said, her voice rising, fierce. "Linked to heart failures. Covered up." Reginald's eyes widened, his hand gripping the table's edge. "How do you know this?" he demanded, but Zora's glare silenced him. "I studied my husband's death," she said, her voice raw, cutting. "Same drug, same lies." Reginald's face paled, his sister's betrayal sinking in. "We need more," he said, but Zora was already moving, her hands tearing through another drawer. She found a memo, half-shredded, marked CV Directive, Suppress Batch 7A Data. Her breath caught, the paper shaking in her grip. "This is Clara," she said, thrusting it at Reginald. His eyes scanned it, his jaw clenching, a storm brewing behind his gaze. "She signed off on this," he muttered, his voice a growl. Zora's chest burned. She lost her husband to a drug like this, and Clara had buried it for profit. They needed an outsider. Zora dialed Elena Torres, the journalist saved at the gala, her voice urgent. "Meet us, now." Elena arrived at a diner across town, her notebook clutched tight, eyes sharp with determination. Zora slid the memo across the table, her fingers steady despite her racing heart. "Clara falsified trial data," she said, her words a hammer. "People died." Elena's pen flew, her questions sharp, relentless. "Can you prove intent?" she asked. Zora nodded, her mind racing through chemical structures. "The redactions hide lethal side effects. I can map them." Reginald cut in, his voice tense. Clara's untouchable. She's got the board. Zora's eyes flashed, her fist slamming the table. Not if we expose her first. Her defiance burned, a fire fueled by years of being dismissed. Elena's gaze locked on Zora, respect flickering. I've got a contact, Elena said, her voice low. Lab tech, ex-Voss employee. He'll talk. They met him in a shadowed alley, a nervous man named Luis, his hands shaking as he handed over a USB drive. Clara ordered the data scrubbed, he whispered. Batch 7A killed dozens. I kept backups. Zora's heart raced, her fingers closing around the drive, its weight a promise of justice. Luis flinched as a car passed, his eyes darting. She's watching, he said, voice trembling. Zora's jaw tightened, Clara's threat echoing. You'll lose more than your job. She turned to Reginald, her voice steel. Your sister's a monster. You in or out? Reginald's fist clenched, his face a mask of fury and shame. In, he said, his voice a vow. Zora nodded, her resolve ironclad, but her pulse spiked. Clara's reach was long, and the USB drive was a ticking bomb. As they left the alley, a black SUV idled nearby, its tinted windows glinting like eyes watching, waiting for their next move. Your sister killed my husband. Zora Ellis's voice exploded, a raw wound tearing open as she slammed the USB drive onto the table in a Miami safe house. The dim room, a borrowed apartment Elena Torres had secured, pulsed with tension, the air thick with betrayal. Moments ago, Zora, Reginald Voss, and Elena had fled an alley, the black SUV's glint still haunting Zora's mind. The USB, handed over by a terrified lab tech, held the key to Clara Voss's crimes, Batch 7A's falsified data. Zora's hands shook, not with fear, but with a fury that burned through her veins, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Her husband's death, tied to a drug like fluorazepam, now had a name, Clara. Reginald's face drained of color, his fist gripping the table's edge. That's impossible, he snapped, cutting her off, his voice a desperate blade. Clara wouldn't. Zora's glare sliced through him, her finger jabbing the air. Open it, she barked, shoving her cracked laptop toward Elena. Her heart pounded, memories of her husband's labored breaths flooding back. Nights spent studying biochemistry to understand why he died. The CV note, the redacted files, and Luis's confession all pointed to Clara's cover-up. Zora's chest heaved, her resolve ironclad, but her eyes burned with a grief she'd buried for years. Elena plugged in the USB, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up unredacted trial data. Batch 7A, she read, her voice sharp, urgent. Fluorazepam trials 2015. Side effects, cardiac arrest, 47 cases. Suppressed by C. Voss. Zora's breath caught, her nails digging into her palms, drawing blood. 47, she whispered, her voice a blade, including him. Her husband's face flashed, his smile, his pain, stolen by Clara's greed. Reginald's hands shook, his eyes locked on the screen, disbelief crumbling into horror. She buried this, he muttered, his voice cracking, for profit. Zora's fury surged, her fist slamming the table. She knew, she shouted, her words raw, slicing. She let people die. Her mind raced, connecting the gala's spiked drink to this, a test to silence Elena, who'd been sniffing out the truth. Clara's empire, built on Voss Pharmaceuticals drugs, was a house of lies, and Zora's husband was collateral damage. Elena scrolled further, her voice tight. Emails, Clara to the board. Bury the data. No liability. Signed CV. Reginald's head dropped, his shoulders sagging, betrayal carving a hole in him. I trusted her, he said, voice hollow, but Zora cut him off. Trust? She spat. She's a murderer. Zora paced, her steps sharp, her mind a storm of grief and purpose. Her kids, Jamal and Kiana, flashed in her thoughts. Their future depended on her exposing this. We end her, she said, her voice steel, turning to Elena. Can you publish? Elena nodded, her pen scratching notes, eyes fierce. With this, I can bury her. But Zora's pulse spiked. Clara's threat. You'll lose more than your job, echoed, and that SUV in the alley meant she was watching. Reginald stood, his face hardening. "I'll confront her," he said, but Zora grabbed his arm, her grip iron. "Not yet. We need airtight proof." Her eyes fell on the laptop, a single file blinking. Batch 7A patient logs. Her heart stopped. It listed names, dates, deaths. Her husband's name was there, third from the top. Her throat burned, her fingers trembling as she touched the screen. Grief and rage colliding. "This is it," she said, voice low, lethal. "She can't hide anymore." Reginald's eyes met hers, guilt and resolve mixing. The truth was a bomb, and Zora held the detonator. As Elena copied the file, a faint noise, a car engine outside, sent a chill down Zora's spine. Clara's shadow looming closer, ready to strike. "You're a murderer, Clara, and I've got the proof." Zora Ellis's voice thundered through the Voss Pharmaceuticals boardroom, her words a guillotine aimed at Clara Voss's neck. The CFO's icy facade cracked, her eyes narrowing to slits as Zora stood defiant, clutching the unredacted Batch 7A patient logs. Moments ago in the safe house, Zora had seen her husband's name among the 47 deaths Clara buried for profit, her grief igniting a rage that burned through her veins. Now, in this sleek Miami boardroom, surrounded by suits and skeptical board members, Zora faced Clara head-on, her thrifted blazer no match for the fire in her chest, her fists clenched, nails biting into her palms as she refused to let Clara's power silence her. Clara leaned forward, her voice a venomous hiss. "You're out of your depth, Maid." She spat the word like poison, cutting Zora off before she could breathe. "You think you can waltz in here with your accusations?" Her manicured hands slashed the air, dismissing Zora's existence. The board members shifted, their eyes darting, some smirking at the maid, daring to challenge a Voss. Zora's jaw locked, teeth grinding, the sting of Clara's classism slicing deep. Her kids, Jamal and Kiana, needed her job, her survival, but she wouldn't bow. "I'm not accusing," Zora shot back, her voice ablade. "I'm exposing. Batch 7A killed 47 people, including my husband." The room gasped, the air electric with shock. Clara's face twitched, her composure fracturing. "Lies!" she snapped, slamming her fist on the table, cutting Zora off again. "You're nobody, a cleaner with delusions." Her words were a whip, but Zora's spine stayed iron, forged by years of enduring slights in hotel corridors. She slid the patient logs across the table, her hands steady, her eyes locked on Clara's. "Read it," she said, her voice low, lethal. "His name's there. So are the others you let die." Clara's fingers froze mid-air, her gaze flicking to the papers, fear flashing in her eyes. Reginald, standing beside Zora, stepped forward, his voice tight. "She's right, Clara. The data's unredacted." Clara whirled on him, her glare venomous. "You're siding with her?" she hissed, cutting him off. "A servant over family?" Reginald's jaw clenched, his fist balling, but Zora didn't need his defense. She leaned in, her voice a dagger. "Family doesn't bury bodies for profit." The boardroom fell silent, the weight of her words crushing Clara's bravado. A board member coughed, another shifted, their confidence in Clara crumbling. Clara's eyes darted to a security guard by the door, her nods subtle but sharp. "Enough!" she barked, her voice a command. "Get her out!" The guard, a hulking figure, lunged towards Zora, his hand gripping her arm, yanking her toward a side exit. Zora's heart pounded, her feet stumbling, but her mind raced. She'd expected retaliation, but not this fast. "Let go!" she shouted, twisting free, her elbow slamming into the guard's ribs. He grunted, shoving her into a storage room, the door slamming shut with a metallic clang. Zora's breath caught, her hands pounding the locked door. Clara's threat, "You'll lose more than your job," ringing in her ears. Inside the dark room, shelves of cleaning supplies loomed, the air thick with bleach and panic. Zora's pulse roared, her fingers scrambling for anything, a weapon, a way out. Her foot kicked a bottle, and an idea sparked. She grabbed a jug of ammonia, her biochemistry knowledge kicking in, and poured it under the door. The sharp scent, a signal for help. Her hands shook, but her resolve burned. She'd exposed Clara, but now she was trapped, her kids' faces flashing in her mind. "Not like this," she muttered, her voice fierce, her nails digging into her palms as she banged the door again. Outside, the guard's radio crackled, Clara's voice faint but clear. "Make sure she stays quiet." Zora's blood ran cold, her heart hammering as footsteps approached. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every name on that list, for her husband, for justice. The ammonia's fumes stung her eyes, but she kept pouring, her hands steady, her defiance a beacon. Somewhere beyond the door, Reginald's voice shouted, "Where is she?" A lifeline in the dark, but the guard's shadow loomed closer, a ticking clock promising danger. "You can't lock me away, Clara. I know too much." Zora Ellis's shout echoed in the cramped storage room, her fists pounding the steel door until her knuckles bled. The acrid sting of ammonia, poured to signal for help, burned her throat, but her resolve burned hotter. Moments ago, Clara Voss's guard had trapped her here, his radio crackling with her orders to keep Zora silent after her boardroom accusation exposed Batch 7A's deadly toll, including Zora's husband. Her heart hammered, not with fear, but with a fury that roared through her veins, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She was a 42-year-old black maid, fighting for her kids, Jamal and Kiana, and every victim Clara buried for profit. She wouldn't stop now. The door rattled, and Reginald Voss's voice broke through, sharp and urgent. "Zora, hold on!" His fist slammed the other side, the lock groaning under his force. Zora's pulse surged, her hands scrambling for leverage, shoving a shelf aside with a grunt. The ammonia's fumes had done their job. Reginald had smelled them, tracked her. The door burst open, and he pulled her out, his face pale, eyes blazing with guilt and rage. "Clara did this?" he demanded, his voice a blade. Zora nodded, her breath ragged, her fingers gripping his arm. "She's covering her tracks," she said, voice steel. "We need the final nail." Reginald's jaw tightened, his loyalty to his sister shattered by the patient logs. "The archives," he said, pulling her toward the elevator. "If there's proof, it's there." Zora's chest heaved, her mind racing. Her biochemistry knowledge had cracked the case open, but they needed something airtight to bury Clara. They sprinted through Voss Pharmaceuticals' headquarters, dodging security guards, their footsteps pounding the polished floors. Zora's thrifted blazer was torn, but her eyes burned with purpose, every step a vow to end this. In the archive room, a labyrinth of servers and files, Zora's hands moved like lightning, tearing through cabinets. "Trial approvals," she muttered, her voice fierce, fingers flipping through folders. Reginald hacked a terminal, his hands shaking as he bypassed passwords. "Clara's override code," he said, voice low. "She locked these." Zora's eyes flicked to him, her heart pounding. His betrayal of Clara was a lifeline, but trust was thin. She found a file marked Batch 7A, Executive Orders, her pulse spiking. "This," she said, slamming it open, her eyes scanning pages with surgical precision. The document was a smoking gun. Clara's signature, dated 2015, ordering the suppression of Batch 7A's cardiac risks. "She approved the drug knowing it killed," Zora said, her voice a growl, her husband's name flashing in her mind. Reginald's face crumpled, his fist slamming the table. "She lied to me," he spat, cutting himself off, his shame raw. Zora didn't pause, her hands digging deeper, unearthing an email printout. Clara to a board member. "Bury the deaths, no recall. Profits first." Her nails dug into her palms, blood mixing with ink, her grief and rage colliding. Elena Torres burst in, her journalist's notebook clutched tight, her eyes wide. "Got your text," she said, breathless, dodging a guard's shout from the hall. Zora thrust the email at her. "This ends her," she said, her voice a blade. Elena's pen flew, her voice sharp. "We need corroboration." Zora nodded, her mind racing. She knew drug trials left digital trails. She grabbed a USB from the terminal, her fingers steady despite her pounding heart. "Server logs," she said, her biochemistry knowledge guiding her. "They'll show Clara's edits." Reginald worked the keyboard, sweat beading on his brow, pulling up encrypted logs. Zora leaned in, decoding timestamps and chemical data, her eyes blazing. "Here," she said, pointing to a log entry, C. Voss, 31215, redacted cardiac failure data. It's her, Zora said, her voice lethal. Caught red-handed. Elena snapped a photo, her hands shaking but her resolve iron. This goes live tonight, she said. But Zora grabbed her arm, her grip fierce. Not yet. We confront her publicly. A guard's shout echoed, boots pounding closer. Zora's heart raced, her hands shoving the file and USB into her blazer. Move, she barked, pushing Reginald and Elena toward a side exit. They ducked into a stairwell, their breaths ragged, the evidence burning in Zora's pocket. Clara's shadow loomed, her guards, her reach, her ruthlessness. Zora's kids flashed in her mind, their futures riding on this fight. She won't stop us, Zora said, her voice a vow, her eyes locked on the stairwell's exit. The USB's weight was a ticking bomb, its data a blade ready to cut Clara down. But the guards' footsteps grew louder, a noose tightening around their escape. You're finished, Clara. Your own words betray you. Zora Ellis's voice roared through the Voss Pharmaceutical shareholders meeting, her hands slamming the unredacted Batch 7A files onto the polished boardroom table. The Miami headquarters buzzed with tension, investors and executives frozen, their eyes darting between Zora, a 42-year-old black maid, and Clara Voss, the CFO whose icy composure cracked like glass. Moments ago, Zora, Reginald, and Elena had escaped the archives, the USB drive, and damning email. Bury the deaths, no recall, profits first. Burning in Zora's pocket, her heart pounded, her jaw clenched, the memory of her husband's death fueling her fire. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for the 47 lives Clara erased. Clara stood, her voice a venomous slash. You're a liar, she barked, cutting Zora off, her manicured hand jabbing the air. A maid with no business here, the shareholders murmured, some nodding, their biases flaring. Zora's thrifted blazer marked her as an outsider. Her teeth ground, nails biting into her palms, the sting of Clara's classism, a knife twist. I'm not lying, Zora shot back, her voice steel, shoving the email printout forward. You signed this, ordered the cover-up. People died. Her words were bullets, each one landing, the room's air thickening with shock. Reginald stepped beside Zora, his face hard, betrayal etched in his eyes. She's right, he said, his voice a blade, cutting Clara's defense. Batch 7A killed 47. You hit it. Clara's eyes flashed, her voice rising. You trust her over me? She spat, cutting him off, her glare venomous. She's nothing. But Zora didn't flinch, her hands steady as she plugged the USB into a laptop, projecting the server logs onto the boardroom screen. March 12, 2015, she said, her voice lethal. You redacted cardiac failure data. My husband's name is on that list. The shareholders gasped, their whispers a storm, Clara's control slipping. Elena, live streaming from the corner, zoomed in, her voice sharp. This is going viral, she said, her camera catching Clara's faltering mask. Zora's pulse surged, her kids, Jamal and Kiana, flashing in her mind, their future riding on this moment. Clara lunged forward, her hand swiping at the laptop. Shut it off, she screamed, but Zora blocked her, her arm iron, her eyes blazing. You don't get to hide anymore, Zora said, her voice a guillotine. The screen glowed with Clara's email, undeniable, her signature a death sentence. Then the twist hit. A shareholder, an older woman with sharp eyes, stood, clutching a folder. I was on the board in 2015, she said, voice trembling but firm. Clara bribed me to stay quiet. I kept her memo. She slid it across the table, a handwritten note, Clara's scrawl. Silence Batch 7A, or lose everything. The room erupted, shareholders shouting, Clara's face ashen. Zora's heart stopped, her breath catching. The note was a mirror to the CV clue from the gala, tying Clara to a decade of deceit. You bribed the board? Zora said, her voice a blade, cutting through Clara's last defense. Clara's hands shook, her voice a desperate hiss. You'll ruin us, she spat. But the shareholders turned, their eyes cold, her empire crumbling. Reginald grabbed Clara's arm, his voice raw. You ruined yourself. Security stormed in, summoned by Elena's feed, their cuffs glinting as they closed in on Clara. Zora stood tall, her chest heaving, grief and triumph colliding, her husband's death avenged, but the fight wasn't over. Elena's camera kept rolling, the world watching as Clara was led away, her screams drowned by the crowd's uproar. Zora's fingers curled around the USB, its weight of victory, but her eyes scanned the room, wary. Clara's fall was only the beginning. Her network, her guards, her secrets lingered. As the shareholders' shouts echoed, a faint text buzzed on Elena's phone. "You're next." Zora's jaw tightened, her resolve ironclad. The message a shadow promising more battles. But she was ready, her fire burning brighter than ever. "You can't hide from the truth, Clara. It's over." Zora Ellis's voice rang out, sharp and unyielding, as she stood in a Miami courtroom, her eyes locked on Clara Voss. The former CFO, once untouchable, sat handcuffed at the defendant's table, her tailored suit replaced by a jumpsuit, her icy facade shattered. Moments ago, at the shareholders' meeting, Zora's evidence, Batch 7A's unredacted logs and Clara's damning email, had ignited a firestorm, amplified by a board member's confession of bribery. Now Zora, a 42-year-old black maid, faced Clara one last time, her heart pounding with triumph and grief, her husband's death avenged. Her jaw clenched, nails biting into her palms as she refused to let Clara's glare intimidate her. Clara's voice hissed, cutting through the courtroom's hum. "You think you've won, Maid?" She spat the word venomous, but the judge's gavel slammed, silencing her. "Enough!" he barked, his voice a blade. Zora's chest heaved, the sting of Maid echoing every slight she'd endured, hotel guests sneering, Clara's classist threats. She stood tall, her thrifted blazer a badge of defiance, her kids, Jamal and Kiana, her reason to fight. The judge read the verdict. Guilty. Conspiracy to suppress evidence. Manslaughter, 47 counts. Clara's face crumpled, her hands shaking as cuffs tightened, the courtroom erupting in gasps. Reginald Voss, beside Zora, gripped the bench, his face etched with shame. "She's done," he muttered, his voice raw, cutting himself off before excuses could form. Zora's eyes flicked to him, her voice steel. "Not just her, your company's complicity." Her words were a jab, holding him accountable. The judge continued, ordering Voss Pharmaceuticals to pay millions in reparations to victims' families, including Zora's. Her throat burned, her husband's name, third on the list, ringing in her mind, his death no longer buried. Elena Torres in the gallery typed furiously, her live feed spiking with views, the world watching Clara's fall. Clara's lawyer tried to interrupt, his voice oily. "This is a mistake." But Zora's glare shut him down, her presence a force the room couldn't ignore. "No mistake," she said, her voice lethal, stepping forward. "She chose profit over lives." The judge nodded, his gavel final, as Clara was led away, her screams drowned by the crowd's murmurs. Zora's heart raced, triumph mixing with exhaustion. She'd exposed a titan, but the cost, her years of grief, weighed heavily. Reginald's hand twitched, as if to reach for her, but she turned away, her resolve ironclad. As Clara's silhouette vanished, Zora's fingers curled around the USB drive in her pocket, its data the key to justice. The courtroom's hum faded, but a new sound rose. A faint chant outside, victims' families holding signs thanking Zora. Her chest tightened, not with pride but with purpose. The fight wasn't over. Clara's network lingered, and that cryptic text, "You're next," still burned. Zora's eyes narrowed, her fire unquenched, ready for the next battle to rebuild what was broken. "You think money fixes blood on your hands, Voss?" Zora Ellis's voice cut like a razor, her eyes piercing Reginald Voss as they stood in a packed Miami community center. Clara's guilty verdict still echoed, her cuffs a symbol of justice. But Zora, a 42-year-old black maid, wasn't done. Her jaw clenched, nails digging into her palms, the memory of her husband's death, buried by Voss Pharmaceuticals' greed, fueling her fire. Reginald, once a dismissive billionaire, faced her now, his suit rumpled, his face raw with shame. The center buzzed with locals, nurses, teachers, families, watching Zora, their champion, demand more than reparations. Her heart pounded. Her kids, Jamal and Kiana, in the front row, were her reason to push harder. Reginald's voice wavered, his usual swagger gone. "I'm trying to make it right," he said, stepping forward, but Zora's glare stopped him cold. "Trying," she snapped, cutting him off, her words a whip. "Your company killed 47 people. My husband. Trying's not enough." Her chest heaved, the crowd's murmurs rising, their eyes locked on her, a maid who'd toppled a titan. Reginald's hands shook, his throat bobbing as he faced their judgment. "I know," he said, voice low, raw. "That's why I'm here." Zora's eyes narrowed, her fingers twitching, wary of his promises after a lifetime of broken ones. He turned to the crowd, his voice steadying. "Voss Pharmaceuticals is funding a national healthcare literacy program," he declared, his words sharp, deliberate. $10 million starting here in Miami. Zora Ellis leads it. The room gasped, heads turning to Zora, her breath catching. Her pulse raced. She'd taught neighbors to read medical forms at the clinic. But this was bigger, a chance to empower thousands. Her jaw tightened, pride warring with suspicion. "My terms," she said, her voice steel, stepping closer. "No corporate strings, real change." Reginald nodded, his eyes locked on hers, a vow etched in his gaze. Zora's hands moved fast, grabbing a clipboard from a table, her pen slashing as she outlined demands. Free clinics, plain language medical guides, training for underserved communities. "This isn't charity," she said, her voice a blade, thrusting the clipboard at Reginald. "It's justice." The crowd roared, clapping, their faces alight with hope. Jamal grinned, Kiana's eyes wide, her inhaler clutched tight. Zora's chest burned, not with grief, but with purpose. She was building something Clara's greed couldn't touch. Reginald took the clipboard, his fingers trembling, and signed, his signature a surrender to her vision. At Voss headquarters later, Zora stood in a repurposed office, now a hub for the program. Her hands sorted files, her mind racing, biochemistry knowledge guiding her to design guides that demystified drug warnings. Nurses and volunteers bustled, their voices eager, inspired by her. "You're changing lives," a nurse said, her smile warm. Zora's lips twitched, a rare softness breaking through. "Just giving them what I didn't have," she said, her voice low, her husband's memory a quiet fuel. Reginald entered, his face less haunted, holding a contract. "It's official," he said, handing it over. "Your director. Full control." Zora's eyes scanned the paper, her heart pounding. She wasn't just a maid anymore, but a leader, seen at last. "This better hold," she said, her voice sharp, cutting off his reply. "It will," he said, his tone firm, no longer the arrogant CEO who'd mocked her at the gala. She nodded, her fingers curling around the contract, its weight a promise of change. The crowd outside the center, now chanting her name, filled her with fire. Her kids' future, her community's hope, rested on her shoulders. Elena Torres burst in, her phone buzzing with news. "It's trending," she said, her voice sharp. "Your program's on every feed." Zora's breath caught, her resolve ironclad. She turned grief into power, Clara's fall into a movement. But that cryptic text, "You're next," lingered, a shadow of Clara's network. Zora's jaw clenched, her eyes scanning the room, volunteers ready to follow her lead. She wasn't done fighting. As she handed a guide to a young mother, her touch steady, a new stack of files on her desk hinted at more secrets. Clara's allies, still lurking, waiting to strike. "You don't get to tell me I'm nothing anymore." Zora Ellis's voice thundered through the Miami Community Center, her eyes blazing as she faced a crowd of locals, mothers, workers, kids, clutching healthcare guides she'd written. A year had passed since Clara Voss's conviction, since Zora, a 42-year-old black maid, exposed the Batch 7A cover-up that killed her husband and 46 others. Now in the same center where Reginald Voss had pledged millions for her healthcare literacy program, Zora stood tall, her thrifted blazer replaced with a tailored one, her jaw clenched with pride, not pain. Her heart pounded. Her kids, Jamal and Kiana, sat in the front row, their faces glowing with awe. She wasn't just a maid, she was a force, and the world was listening. A young mother clutching a guide stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You saved us," she said, cutting Zora off before she could deflect. "My son's meds. I understand them now." Zora's chest tightened, her fingers twitching, the woman's gratitude a mirror to her struggle. Nights decoding her husband's charts, fighting to be seen. "You saved yourself," Zora said, her voice steel, handing her a new guide. "I just gave you the tools." The crowd clapped, their cheers a roar, but Zora's eyes scanned them, her pulse racing. She'd built this, but Clara's shadow, that cryptic text, "You're next," still lingered. Reginald Voss stood at the back, his face softer, no longer the arrogant billionaire who'd mocked her at the gala. "You've changed everything," he said, stepping forward, his voice raw. Zora's glare cut him off, her words sharp. "Not me. Them." She gestured to the crowd, nurses, teachers, families, who now read medical forms with confidence, their voices no longer silenced. Her program, now in 20 states, was a movement, its plain language guides a shield against corporate greed. Jamal, 16, grinned from the front, his algebra book swapped for a laptop, coding apps for the program. Kiana, her asthma eased, waved, her smile a spark. Zora's throat burned, pride and grief colliding. She'd done this for them, for her husband. A reporter, Elena Torres, pushed through, her camera flashing. "Zora, you're national news," she said, her voice sharp, urgent. "The White House wants your program." Zora's breath caught, her hands steadying on a table, the weight of her journey crashing in. She'd been a maid, invisible, until she named a poison, exposed a titan, and built a legacy. "Good," she said, her voice ablade. "Let them listen." Elena's smile was fierce. Her article, "Maid turned hero rewrites healthcare." Already viral, millions watching Zora's fire. The scene shifted to the hotel, the same one where Clara's gala had sparked this war. Zora walked in, no longer in an apron, but as a guest speaker for a community event. Marla, her old supervisor, approached, her eyes wide. "You're her," she said, voice soft, cutting herself off. "The one who took down Voss." Zora's lips twitched, a half smile breaking through. "Just doing what's right," she said, handing Marla a guide. A young black maid, Nia, hovered nearby, her notepad trembling. "You're why I'm studying nursing," she said, voice shaking. Zora's heart stopped, her hand reaching out, gripping Nia's. "You're why I keep going," Zora said, her voice low, fierce, passing a biochemistry textbook like a torch. Reginald joined her, his presence no longer a threat but a partnership. "I'm enrolling you," he said, sliding a letter across the table. "University of Miami. Full scholarship. Biochemistry." Zora's eyes widened, her fingers curling around the paper, her dream, once buried by motherhood and loss, alive again. "This isn't charity," she said, her voice sharp, cutting him off. "It's what I earned." Reginald nodded, his eyes gleaming with respect. "You earned more than that," he said, his voice steady. "You're family now." Zora's chest warmed, her kids flashing in her mind. Jamal coding, Kiana breathing easier. A new family forged not by blood, but by truth. The crowd outside grew, chanting Zora's name, signs reading "Know Your Rights" waving high. Subplots resolved. Marla promoted Nia, inspired by Zora's fight. Elena's articles sparked federal investigations into other drug firms. Jamal's app launched, teaching teens medical literacy. Zora stepped to a podium, her voice clear, cutting. "No one's invisible," she said, her words a vow. "Not when you know the truth." The crowd roared, their cheers a wave, washing away years of being unseen. Zora's eyes burned, not with tears but with fire. She'd turned grief into power, loss into legacy. The moral hit hard. Hidden brilliance can dismantle injustice, giving voice to the silenced. Zora's journey, from a maid mocked at a gala to a leader reshaping healthcare, resonated with the 40-plus audience, their hearts stirred by her resilience. As she stepped off the podium, Nia handed her a note, her eyes wide. "Found this in the hotel files," she whispered, the paper marked CV Network, next target. Zora's jaw clenched, her fingers tightening, the shadow of Clara's allies still lurking. She tucked the note away, her resolve ironclad, her eyes scanning the crowd. The fight wasn't over, but Zora was ready, her fire a beacon, lighting the way for those who'd never been seen. Hidden brilliance can shatter injustice, giving voice to the unseen. That's the heart of Zora Ellis's story. From a mocked maid to a leader who exposed a deadly cover-up, she proved that resilience and truth can rewrite the rules. What did Zora's journey spark in you? Have you faced a moment where you stood up against the odds? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We're listening. Thank you for joining us on this ride. Stay tuned for more stories that ignite hope and change. See you next time.